Hi, I'm Christina,
Hi, I'm Leo.
and we are going to talk about the Neanderthal hunting dynamics in the Mediterranean and Cantabrian Iberian area. It has been said that Neanderthal groups from the Iberian Peninsula were excellent hunters of medium and large sized prey, alongside a proven consume of small prey like leopards, tortoises, and birds. Therefore, they had a great knowledge of the surrounding landscape and the available resources like animal and plant biomass, lithium resources, site position, etc. However, we really know if their behavior was always the same along the Iberian Peninsula. Our objectives today are to determine if the Neanderthal practiced a homogeneous subsistence strategy on all areas and sites, or instead we can identify any different resource management. Consequently, we will also want to determine which factors could explain those differences, such as geographic location, chronology, predator competition, or maybe type of prey. And also know to what extent environmental conditions have played a fundamental role in their behavior. To answer this question, we combine archaeological, taphonomic, and paleoecological data from 3 archaeological sites.
One of the sites is Jonin Cave, located in Cantabrian coast, and the other two sites are Abrigo de la Quebrada and El Sal, located in the Mediterranean area, from which we are going to review the paleo-environmental conditions, their prey selection, and their processing and consuming pattern. Jonin Cave is located in the eastern edge of Asturias in the municipality of Peñamellera Alta, in the basin of River Cares and Deva, surrounded by a mountain landscape, and a distance of 18 kilometers from the Cantabrian Sea. The archaeological sequence contains Mousterian, Upper Paleolithic, and Holocene level. Moreover, there are also some levels with parietal are associated with the Upper Paleolithic. We have studied the Mousterian assemblage, and here we will discuss the results from the level 8 from Cono posterior area, highlighted in green in the slide, with a dating that confirms it belongs to Mousterian, more or less the mid-3. Quebrada, Abrigo de la Quebrada, is located in Valencia on Rambla de las Saías Canyon, with a orientation of the shelter in northwest, so its direct exposure to the sunlight is limited. The landscape around the shelter is diverse, comprising both very steep terrain and wide plains. Accordingly, plant formations are also diverse, with a strong duality between the ravine floors and surrounding mountains and plains. The site was excavated between 2007 and 2015, and there are 9 stratigraphic levels that can be assigned at the base of the sequence to mid-5, and the upper part, level 5, 4, and 3, could be both mid-5, 4, and 3. The open-air archaeological site of El Sal is located in the middle of the Alcoy Valley and protected by a Paleocene limestone wall covered by tufa and travertine. This site is placed in the foothills of the Sierra Mariola, closest to the riverbed of Barchel and Serpis, with high diversity biotope and a very rugged orography. The 6-meter thick stratigraphy sequence have divided in 13 lithostratigraphic units. The bulk of the sedimentary deposit formed mid-Paleolithic, while the uppermost part of the deposit was formed during the Upper Paleolithic, but was later removed by karst reactivation during the Holocene. The radiometric dating placed the first Neanderthal occupation around 60 kiloyears ago to 44 kiloyears ago. If we compare the 3 sites, we can see that the human occupations are short, but we have some difference. At Jonin, Mousterian archaeological evidence is scant, even the lithic record and combustion structure are inexistent, which indicate sporadic presence in the cave. The accumulation have a mixed origin with anthropic deposit, but also with an important carnivore occupation related to hyenas, leopard, and even canids. In the upper level of Quebrada, human occupation is short, but recurrent and seasonal, from spring to autumn, and are linked with hunting activities. A greater number of complete operating chains are observed in the lithic industry, with reuse, recycling, and reshaping of pieces. There is a greater production using the Levallois technique of napping local raw material, as well as allochthonous outcrops located up to 100 kilometers away. There is no evidence of carnival activities here or in this part of the sequence, unlike the basal levels. And as salt, human occupation are also short and recurrent along the annual cycle. In this site, anthropic deposits are abundant. There are also some raptor intrusion and few carnivore evidence. Abundant lithic remains have been realized in local flint, with few allochthonous material and little use of limestone. As Quebrada, the greater production has been directed to the exploitation of nodules, block, and flake with Levallois technique, together with the use of bipolar and multipolar in some cases. Presence of combustion structure is one of the most relevant characteristics of the site, especially to its degree of conservation. For other hand, the presence of 6 human remains confirmed the use of this place by Neanderthal until 44 kiloyears ago, together with other evidence derived from biochemical study of the sediment. As we commented in the description of each site, Junín, Quebrada, and El Sal are located in an environment of high ecological richness, with a diversity of biotopes in mid-mountain landscape, on which geomorphological studies indicate that there haven't been major changes compared to current landscape. In the case of the Cantabrian area, the environmental characterization of the sequence is currently in progress. Micromammal, birds, and anthropological studies provide preliminary information about the context. Most of the micromammal species frequent low-density forests with abundant underground and open areas, such as meadows and grassland. The required humid environment in terms of both soils and atmosphere inhabiting mild Atlantic or Central European climates. Cono posterior has not yielded any charcoal remains, but the woody flora identifying other patterns of decay with the same chronology show open forests with Heliophilus and pioneer vegetation. The predominance of open formation with some species that prefer a cool climate like Scotch pines whose current optimum environment in mountain and subalpine zones suggests that the conditions of the surrounding of Junín would have been cooler and more arid during the Mesozoic period. Regarding the zonobiomes, the macro and micromammal shows a predominance of type 6, indicating the presence of deciduous forests and temperate climate conditions. In the Mediterranean area, in both sites, and Quebrada and El Sal, micromammal and charcoal analysis determined that Middle Paleolithic bioclimatic conditions were supra-Mediterranean, with temperatures from 8 to 13 and with a mean annual precipitation more than 400 at Quebrada and El Sal. In the case of Quebrada, anthropological assemblies show a highly homogeneous composition with predominance of Criophilus pines, but also with some angiosperm. Based on this evidence, the area around Quebrada would have been under dry or subhumid supra-Mediterranean environmental conditions, from the scarcity of shrub and small trees, and open pine parkland grown on poor soils with little edaphic development, typical of harsh climatic periods. In El Sal, the information provided by microvertebrates indicates a predominance of wooded environmental, with the presence also of open environments similar to the dry grassland and wet meadows. On the other hand, anthropological data express a significant change in the vegetal landscape during the mid-3 compared to the mid-4, producing a substitution of Juniperus and Sabina from Criophilus pine forests associated with more humid conditions. In addition, a clear trend toward aridity is identified, especially among circa 52-50 kiloyears ago and 59-54 kiloyears ago. At the paleoclimatical level, environmental conditions were colder and more humid than the current ones, associated with supra-Mediterranean conditions. Macrofauna and anthropological studies, it has been possible to identify a mean annual temperature of 10 degrees, a mean annual precipitation between 600 or more millimeters, showing a similar condition that those recorded in the Sierra del Jalambre in Teruel. Unlike Junín, here it's really clear that the sonomion 4 predominate in both sides, meaning Mediterranean typical vegetation and climatic conditions marked by wet winters and dry summers. In this context, the taxonomic composition comprises different species of ungulate, carnivore, and small prey. Among ungulates, caprines, cervid, and equid predominate in the assemblage. There are more different species in Junín and El Sal than in QUEBRADA. Regarding to carnivores, this group highlighted at Junín with 7 different species. The presence in El Sal is lower with only 4 species and at QUEBRADA is practically anecdotal. The small prey are more relevant in the Mediterranean area, but they have usually a mixed origin with a greater natural component. If we compare the paleoenvironmental data among the 3 sites, we have more similarity between QUEBRADA and El Sal, both placed in the supra-Mediterranean area where temperature and precipitation oscillate widely between winter and summer, with general subhumid conditions, although at QUEBRADA alternate with dry moments. On the contrary, the conditions surrounding of Junín wouldn't have been cooler and more arid during the Mousterian period, with typical temperate deciduous forest located on mid-altitude mountains. Nevertheless, orography from all 3 sites is characterized by mid-high mountain and valley combination. Taxonomic diversity is evident in all 3 assemblies, although carnivore is more relevant in Junín than in Mediterranean region, as the ratio carnivore-ungulate also show with more than 30% at Junín. In the case of El Sal, the ratio amounts to 23%. Also, we have considered that the small prey is reduced to 14%, indicating a low impact of the carnivore in the site formation.
Now, regarding prey selection, as you can see among the captured taxa, there are some preferences. In general, all ungulate species are related to Neanderthal activities, although at Junín, some of them seem to have mixed origin. Leporids have also a mixed origin at El Sal, but we haven't enough evidences to determine the agent in the other 2 sites. On the contrary, tortoise is always a human prey. Carnivore remains are still without a clear identification. We know that at Junín, most of them are consequence of natural death or carnivore activities like the predation of bears by hyenas. So, why the human group select those preys? We have considered 3 possible explanations. Could be affected by the environment? Yes, but in this context, the taxonomic spectrum seems not to be affected by abrupt climate changes. Indeed, all the species are eurythermal. Could be because of the carnivore competition for medium-sized prey? For sure, and we have identified different patterns. At Junín, caprine accumulation is due to carnivore activities. On the contrary, human groups focus their subsistence on other medium-sized prey, like red deer. So here, the competition with large carnivores seems to condition the human selection. On the other hand, in Mediterranean sites, carnivore evidences in archaeological record are really low and are usually related to small prey like leporids. Therefore, Neanderthals could select any available species. Or maybe prey choice could be determined by other factors related to their own strategies, such as seasonal territorial management, characteristics of human occupation. We are talking about mobility, functionality, duration, and group size, or even their own preferences. These are relevant factors to look at in depth after the archaeological comparison. The following point is the prey exploitation. Neanderthals usually exploited all resources from hunting species, meat, grease, fur, bones, with different purposes, consuming, bone industry, fuel. However, they will be practicing homogeneous strategies on all areas and sites, or could be any differences between sites, and why? If we analyze the main hunting species, caprines, cervids, and equids, we can see that equids provide more biomass at Quebrada and El Salt, although the number of individuals is lower than red deer and goats at El Salt and almost similar to Quebrada. But this data must be qualified by the anatomical representation. At Quebrada, the best represented elements are mandible, fore and hind limbs, and in the case of goat, also extremities. The density correlation demonstrates that diagenetic alteration affected the bone preservation, as we can see in the overrepresented of equid teeth. This fact difficults also the MNI calculation and the assessment of transport decision. At Jonin and El Sal, appendicular elements are better represented, maybe related with partial transport of animal carcasses, and punctual elements a priori not so nutrition, even in large size like cranial fragments. Nevertheless, we must consider that, contrary to Quebrada, at El Salt, the density correlation demonstrates that taphonomic alteration affected bone preservation on cervids and equids, but not on the caprines. About the processing patterns, anthropogenic modifications have been identified in all three sites. Catmar are quite abundant at Jonin and El Sal. At Quebrada, concretion made it difficult their correct identification. These anthropic evidences are placed on long bone diaphyses, ribs, and some on phalanges, scapula, and coxae. Their characteristics and location allow us to link skinning, evisceration, disarticulation, and defleshing to red deer processing. And only evisceration, disarticulation, and defleshing are present on caprine bones. The ungulate assemblage is really fragmented, mainly in Mediterranean sites, with percentage of complete bones lower than 2 or 13% depending on taxa. Green fractures affect mostly long bones, metapods, and phalanges, and complete epiphyses are scarce. Related to this pattern, percussion marks are more abundant at Quebrada and El Salt. At Jonin are just a few. These modifications are found on long bones like femur and humerus, and phalanges on red deer and caprines. Thermal alteration is the most abundant modification at Quebrada and El Sal, by number of remains. On contrast, as we have already said in the presentation of Jonin, there are no hairs or bare bones evidence similar to other Middle Paleolithic Cantabrian assemblages. In the Mediterranean sites, around 35% of red deer bones and between 40–50% in the case of caprine are burnt. Fire alteration covers all the bone surface and affects all kinds of bones. At Quebrada, calcinate level predominates. However, at El Salt, charred bones are more abundant. This taphonomic analysis provides information about what kind of resources Neanderthal used and for what purpose. They could use dietary resources like meat, marrow, or grease. Presence of cut marks on meaty bones like main long bones of fore and hind limbs provide evidence of the fleshing and consuming the meat. Secondly, marrow was also consumed, supported by green fractures and percussion notches on long bones with more medullary cavity. Moreover, the marrow utility index applied at El Sal support this fact. And lastly, grease extraction is more difficult to identify. However, the positive result of the grease utility index at El Sal prove this activity. Likewise, the scant of complete epiphysis and the constant of great quantity of spongy undetermined fragments, mainly at QUEBRADA, could also support this idea. Neanderthals could use other secondary resources like fur or bones. The presence of cut marks on cranial and extremity elements may be related to the skinning process. On the other hand, the use of bone as fuel has been proposed in some sites. At QUEBRADA, we have considered this possibility because of the great quantity of calcined remains and spongy fragments. However, we are still not sure due to the palimpsest condition, as at El Salt, with a lot of herds along the space, and the possibility that other activities like cleaning could be part of the causes. Only at El Sal there is a technological use of cervids and equids, long bones, as retarders for lithic production. In this sense, evidences in the Mediterranean area are few, probably due to worse preservation process in shelters compared to the great record of the Cantabrian caves.
Having in mind our objective, we can try to answer different questions. Firstly, know to what extent the environmental conditions have played a fundamental role in their behavior. In all three sites, Neanderthal dominate a landscape with biotopes, diversity of mid-mountain and valleys, without the environmental characteristics having influence in their behavior. In some cases, as in Sal Unit 5, some changes are beginning to be seen derived from general change at climatic levels, as in the case of the advent of Henry IV. The appearance of taxa more typical of open areas like Bos primigenius and the decrease in human presence might have a strong ecological explanation. On the other hand, small prey availability, like leopards or tortoise, is the only difference between the North and the Mediterranean area. This means a broadened taxonomic prey diversity. The second one is determined if the Neanderthal practiced homogeneous subsistence strategy on all areas and sites. The hunting strategies are the same, focus on medium or large sized ungulate, goats, red deer, and equids, complemented occasionally with other taxa less relevant in the surrounding landscape, and with the small prey in the case of the Mediterranean area. Nevertheless, unique data has demonstrated that competition with medium and large carnivores led Neanderthal to select red deer instead of capering species. Furthermore, evidence of human predation of carnivores are really scarce in all three sites, as well as in the Middle Paleolithic Peninsula context. In our case, only on some Kuon bones of joint present cut marks. We do identify different types of occupation based in their functionality and their seasonality. Occupation relating with more summertime at QUEBRADA, this could be because of the ordered climatic condition in winter or surely due to a territorial organization where other sites could play a relevant role in those months. On the contrary, the occupational SAR are recurrent along the year, but always with a short-term type.
The third question is if we can identify any different management of the resources. Regarding the fauna resource management, transport differs depending on the prey site. Selective in the case of large species and mainly complete for the medium sized. although we still have different anatomical representation that could be affected by preservation problems, or could also reflect transport decisions from different occupations. Hertz and thermal alterations represent a clear point of contrast. Their absence at Yonin draws our attention. We thought that the human occupation could be also outer the cave, a non-excavated space. But in other parts of the sequence, in the same inner area of the cave, we do have hertz and bare bones. Therefore, the explanation may be related to the really sporadic character of the human occupation. On the contrast, Quebrada and El Sal present abundant evidences of the fire use along their sequence, although their culinary and secondary application is still not defined. There is a more intense exploitation of red deer than of goat in all three sites, even if the dietetic resources are constantly centered on meat, marrow, and grease in both species. The main differences are placed in the secondary resource exploitation, as retouchers for lithic production at El Sal and the possibility of skin treatment or bone as well. Thanks to this comparative work, we have realized that it's necessary to further develop issues related to, for example, use the same methodology along our size sequence and compare the result using a European Middle Paleolithic context. Also, to know better the fire utility and its possible use as secondary resource, as other sites from South France and Cantabrian area have proposed. Complete the archaeological data with other type of analysis, like traceology, and provide seasonal data with better temporal resolution by implementing other analyses like teeth, microwear, or cementochronology. Moreover, we are working on levels from early Upper Paleolithic of Yonin and other Mediterranean sites as Mayaetes Cave and Cendres Cave, with basal deposits in order to check if these characteristics of Middle Paleolithic subsistence continue. For example, if the human prey selection will be also determined by the carnivore competition or not. Thanks a lot for your attention, and we are here to answer your questions.